I want you to imagine one of the world's great natural wonders, a massive, pulsing tide of life just flowing across the landscape, shaping the very earth it walks on. Okay, now imagine it's gone. That, right there, is the story of the Kruger Lowveld. It's an ecosystem that once had its very own Great Migration, a spectacle that's now completely lost to time. To really get what was lost, we have to go back in time. This quote, from way back in 1896, it paints a picture of a world just teeming with life. And listen to those words, omnipresent, astonishing numbers. This wasn't just a case of, seeing a few wildebeest here and there. They were the landscape. They defined it.
And this wasn't just some random gathering of animals, not at all. It was a system, a vast, cyclical movement of wildebeest and zebra that was like the engine for the entire region, stretching all the way from the Drakensberg Mountains to the coastal plains of Mozambique.
So, let's talk about that system. What did this world actually look like when it was working as intended? Well, before the fences, it was a world in perfect, wild balance.
Now, this constant movement, it wasn't aimless wandering. For these animals, survival itself was all about being on the move. It was this genius strategy, hardwired into them over millennia, to follow the rains and chase that fresh, green, nutritious grass that would spring up.
And this strategy, it had some incredible perks. First, they always had the best food on the menu. Second, you have what's called the big herd effect. We're talking a literal wall of wildebeest that makes it almost impossible for a lion to just pick one off. They also acted as this, quote, massive natural mowing machine, grazing an area and then moving on, which is absolutely critical for keeping grasslands healthy. And maybe best of all, they could literally walk away from their main predators for months at a time.
But then, piece by piece, this perfect system just began to unravel. And the real tragedy here is that so many of the changes were well-intentioned, but they kicked off this cascade of consequences that, honestly, no one saw coming.
So how did it happen? Well, it was a slow bleed. In 1923, a huge chunk of their pasture land is just carved off for cattle ranching. Then comes the knockout blow. In 1961, a 520-kilometer fence goes up, completely severing their ancient migration route. To fix this, managers build artificial water holes. But that just creates a new problem, overgrazing. So what was the next fix? They started culling. And you have to understand, this fence wasn't just a line on a map. This quote from a ranger who was there on the ground, Gus Adendorf, it gives us this visceral, just heartbreaking account of what happened. Animals piling up against a barrier they couldn't possibly understand, dying from thirst and sheer confusion. It was an ecological catastrophe.
You see the pattern here? It's a domino effect of interventions, where every single fix just created a new, bigger problem. The fence leads to the water holes. The water holes anchor the herds, which destroys the grass. The destroyed grass leads to culling. It's a textbook example of what you'd call a management death spiral.
And this had deadly, real-world consequences. Between 1965 and 1972 alone, that's how many wildebeest were culled, killed to solve a problem that management had created in the first place.
Okay, so this is where the story takes a truly mind-bending turn. After decades of drought and human meddling, you'd think the one thing that could finally help these herds would be rain, right? Well, you would be completely wrong.
In 1971, the drought finally broke. A green breath of life, as they called it, returned to the land. The parched earth became this rain-soaked paradise just choked with tall grass. This should have been the moment of salvation.
So with all this incredible new food, the animal populations must have bounced back, right?
No, the exact opposite happened. The very year the rains returned, the Central District's wildebeest population crashed by an unbelievable 52%. How on earth does a paradise of food lead to a population collapse?
Well, the answer to this paradox? It's the grass. The grass completely flipped the script. See, on the open plains, wildebeest had the advantage: high visibility, safety, and numbers. But in that tall, dense grass, the advantage shifted entirely to the predators. It became an ambush hunter's absolute dream. And everything came together in this perfect storm. The tall grass gave the lions cover. The artificial water holes had already allowed the lion population to double. The wildebeest weren't in their huge migratory superherds anymore. They were in small, scattered groups. And because they were stuck in one place, the now booming lion population could feast on its favorite meal year-round. The very rain that brought the grass also brought their doom.
So, let's fast forward a bit. Decades later, a key mistake is finally corrected. The fence. What you could call the original sin of this story, it comes down. But the question is, was it too late?
In 1993, the fences between Kruger and the private reserves to the west were finally removed. The gate was at long last open, but the great herds, that epic migration, it never came back. The system didn't just reset itself.
So why didn't they return? Well, because the home they remembered was gone. It didn't exist anymore. Without those massive herds constantly grazing and trampling, the open grasslands had changed. What's known as bush encroachment had turned their savanna into dense woodland, a habitat that's completely wrong for a plains animal like a wildebeest. The door was open, but the house was gone.
And this leads to what is honestly one of the most haunting images in modern conservation. The last survivors of these once mighty herds in the Timbavati Reserve. They're now so desperate for the open spaces they evolved for that they gather on man-made airplane airstrips every single evening. It is a stark, heartbreaking symbol of a species living in the ghost of its former home.
This whole saga, this whole tragedy, it reveals a profound and really painful lesson. All of those interventions, the culling, the water holes, they were all focused on the animals. But they missed the fundamental truth. You cannot save a species without first saving its habitat.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly challenging question. When you've not only stopped a natural process, but you've fundamentally rewired the landscape itself, how do you go back? Removing a fence is easy, but restoring an entire ecosystem that has been changed to its very core, well, that is the monumental challenge we're left with today.